There's been a lot of excitement over the last few years about what we call super shoes. Today we'll look at what a super shoe is, the progression of them over the last few years, how effective they can be in terms of helping your performance, and also how you may be able to change your training a little bit and get some better recovery through integrating some super shoe usage into your training. Let's start with a story about Jared Ward getting ready for the New York City Marathon. The Monday prior to the race, he received a package on his doorstep. There were 3 pairs of shoes similar to this. On the outside, they looked very much the same. There was just a little different code underneath that we didn't know what it represented at the time. The workout for race week, typically it was done on a Wednesday, and it's 3 or 4 times 1 mile at race pace with 2-minute recoveries. And we thought, well, instead of doing that on the track or road this time, let's do it on this treadmill here. And while doing those intervals, put on a different shoe each time and measure oxygen uptake to tell how much energy he's using to run. So we went for that option. He first wore the Saucony Kinvara, which was the one he was most likely going to be racing in. And then 2 of these other new prototype shoes, and it was the same energy cost all the way through. Finally, he puts on the final shoe, and all of a sudden I see the energy cost or oxygen uptake, which indicates how much energy he's using, drop noticeably on this plot that's coming through live as he runs. He stops after the last interval. I say, hey, come take a look at this, and we see the graph and we start getting excited about it. We pull the data into the spreadsheet, do a little math, and we find he was using 2.5% less energy running in this final prototype shoe compared to all the other 3. So I was thinking, maybe you want to race in this. I know it's race week. You haven't trained in it before to know if it's really going to feel good for a whole marathon. But it was such a benefit that he decided one more run in it later in the week just to see that it felt good on his feet, and it did. So he went for it on race day. And as he progressed through the race, he thought, this does feel really good. He felt like he was using a little less energy. He was able to keep the pace without so much effort. And the downhills especially felt really good coming off of some of the bridges through the New York course. And as he comes to the final turn, he glances over his shoulder and he sees Scott Fauble there in 7th place. Jared's in 6th at the time, but Jared knows he's the top American. And if he can push through and somehow stay ahead of Scott, who he knew was going to be a great finisher, then he gets $25,000 instead of $15,000. So Jared crosses the finish line, finishes 6th overall, top American, 4 seconds ahead of Scott, who had closed well in those final meters, but Jared was just able to hold him off. So we started calling these his $10,000 shoes, realizing that the 2.5% of energy savings he had translated, we're sure, to a lot more than 4-second difference that he needed to keep that spot in the end. So what is the definition of a super shoe? Let's take a look at this one here. This is the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3. It's the first shoe that Saucony released that used the full height allowed by the rule book for what a shoe is allowed to be. The first thing you notice when you pick up a super shoe is they're very light for the amount of material that's actually there. So the foam is a low density foam that's also very responsive. When we test these with some mechanical devices, we find the energy that gets put into the shoe, nearly all of it gets released back into the person. So they don't actually add anything to your step, but you just lose less. When you look at the traditional, what they call EVA foams, those return about 70% of the energy that's put into them. With the new foams that are available, we're seeing anywhere from about 86, even into the 90-something% for return of energy, which is, I think, the primary benefit of these super shoes, especially when you consider the amount of displacement that occur with the thickness of that midsole. The other part that quantifies it as a super shoe is the carbon fiber plate. It's usually some sort of S-shaped curve throughout the shoe that adds a lot of stiffness in this way, which changes the lever systems around the foot and ankle that has some small benefit from what we've observed. The final part of a super shoe is with that thicker midsole, they've changed how thick it stays throughout the length of the shoe, which changes the shape a bit. What they call the toe spring, the shape up here, feels a little different as you rock forward in the shoe. So there are some differences in shape, stiffness of the shoe through the carbon fiber plate, and the low density, highly responsive foam. That's what categorizes something as a super shoe. Now, how much of a benefit do these shoes actually provide? The original studies looked at the Nike Vaporfly 4%. It was named the 4% from that first study that looked at 3 different speeds and found on average runners used 4% less energy compared to some more traditional marathon racing shoes that were available at the time. Now, in terms of performance, we might wonder, well, what would we expect to see there? And it's not firmly established, but the research that's out there available for us shows somewhere around 2% benefit when we get a 4% benefit in terms of running economy. Now, everyone responds a little differently to these shoes, so it's not going to be the same answer for everyone, but there definitely is a drop in performance times as a result of wearing super shoes. There have been some exciting changes in the shoes over the last few years. Every company now seems to have a super shoe working well for their athletes. There's been a lot of iterations of shoes through the years for those that have been in the business of making super shoes for a while. I started with sharing about Jared's prototype shoe that was effective for him. That led to what they call the Endorphin series of racing shoes. This is the Endorphin Pro 3, which had some major changes in terms of the foam they were using and the shape of the foam, how thick it was. Some really nice benefits in terms of that percentage points of how much energy are we saving as we run. That one led to the next version, which is the Endorphin Elite, which an interesting thing to note is when we brought Jared into the lab, he was actually a little bit more economical in the Pro 3 compared to the Elite, but when I put this on, I was a little bit more economical in the Elite than the Pro 3. So it's important for you to figure out which shoe is going to be best for you. We don't all respond in the same ways. Perhaps factors like foot strike, body weight, stride length, other factors that may be more intrinsic to the foot, the shape of your foot, the musculature of the foot, and so on. So not the same answer for everyone, and unless you have some metabolic testing equipment, it'd probably be mostly by trying it on, see how it feels, doing workouts in them, and seeing how you respond. The final idea for us to think about today is how this might affect our training. I hear of some people wearing super shoes for every run that they do. I hear some that avoid it in every case until it's race day. And so what's the right choice here? What we've observed and are leaning towards in our training group is we wear the super shoes when we're doing workouts that are close to or faster than race pace. On long runs, there's a mix of what the guys are doing. Some are doing some shoes that we might categorize as in between traditional training shoes and super shoes. Some are wearing super shoes for the long runs. And that's just a bit of preference. The reason we like to wear super shoes for some of the workouts and long runs is that our legs seem to feel a little bit fresher. There's not as much muscle damage because we're cushioning the body more effectively with that thick, low-density foam. So at the end of a marathon in racing, you may feel your legs are a little bit fresher if you've been able to protect your body with all those tens of thousands of foot strikes that are going on. We want to be adapted to them to be able to handle a full 26 miles in a shoe that's not if we haven't used that shoe much in training, then our feet might not be adapted well enough to handle the forces that are applied in a slightly different way. So we do want some training in the super shoes. That'll help protect our muscles a little bit as we're doing our training, allow us to either do more volume or a higher intensity, or at least be able to recover quicker to be able to handle the next days of training. As you go through the years of training and your body may not be recovering quite as rapidly, then this can be a real benefit in terms of being able to continue doing the workouts that you'd like to while still having your muscles recover in between workouts. There's a whole lot left in terms of what's going to happen to the shoe development over the next few years and how we'll integrate those into our training and racing. I didn't cover everything that's out there yet, but wanted to give you a nice summary of a few things we've been thinking about. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the comments, and I'll try to respond to as many of those as I have time for.